when they're answering the question, you are taking away from their time. So I do appreciate your enthusiastic support, but please remember that as we reach about the halfway point of this. So the next question now goes to you, Congressman Barber. What do you think the government's role should be in managing private enterprise? Put it another way, should the government step in to bail out companies that are perceived to be too big to fail?
First of all, I don't think we should be doing that. I think the government's role is to intervene when it's necessary to bring us back from the fiscal cliff. And I'll just take one example. That is when the auto industry was about to go under and 1 million jobs would be lost in this country. I think that was an appropriate intervention, but I don't believe the government should be intervening in private enterprise. But when the banks took us to the cliff and almost pushed us over with their practices, their derivatives, and all the other things that they did to make money at the risk of putting our country in danger economically, there was time to start saying to those banks, you can't do that. So I believe there's a time for government, as Teddy Roosevelt said many years ago, we cannot have a monopoly that is going to control the citizens of this country. And he was one of the first people, a Republican, to make sure that government had its right role to play when business is out of control. Ultimately, jobs are created in the private sector. As a private business owner myself with my wife for 22 years, that's where businesses are created, in the private sector. But there's times when we're on an emergency situation, when the government has to step in. Because in the case of what happened when the economic crisis hit, the banks weren't going to deal with it. We had to do something to prevent that falling off the cliff. I was with a group of seniors, 500 of them, when the stock market tanked, when $1 trillion in their investments were lost because of the irresponsible practices of the financial institutions and the banks. That's when the government needs to step up and look out for the citizens of this country. That's the kind of intervention I believe, but certainly not to create jobs, and certainly not to intervene beyond what it needs to do to prevent a collapse of our economy, which is exactly what happened.
Thank you, Congressman. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thanks.
Okay.
I believe in the free market, and I believe in the entrepreneurial spirit. It is the ideas of people who can put them into business and know that they're going to be able to grow that makes this country great. I do not believe the government should be picking winners and losers in a crony capitalism. That is not what entrepreneurial spirit is all about, and the government trying to interfere in that way is only going to stifle innovation and stifle growth. So I don't believe the government should be intervening. I think the government should be getting out of the way. They should be rolling back burdensome regulations. They should be minimizing the tax code and keeping the tax code simple and keeping it low. Do those things that are actually going to spur growth for job creators, spur growth for small businesses, those that are actually going to put people back to work. That's what I'm for, and that's what I'll fight for when I get to Washington, D.C. Now, I want to go back to a point Mr. Barber made, and he's made it in TV commercials, and he's made it in mailings, but he keeps calling me extreme. He keeps calling me an extremist. You know what? I've worn the uniform for 26 years, fighting extremism abroad to give him the freedom to make statements like that. That is just wrong, and it's inappropriate. I have served my country. I have stood up for what's right. I've stood up against the establishment. I've figured out how to solve problems. For crying out loud, I sued the Secretary of Defense when I was a major because they had extreme policies that were imposing a female apartheid on our own troops. I've fought extremism in the Middle East. I've done it personally in Afghanistan, and I've done it in Africa. Don't start calling me an extremist, Mr. Barber. Those are the inflammatory words and the divisiveness that people are sick and tired of. And it's just typical political rhetoric when you're concerned about running on your record and you're concerned about running on your profile. This is not what politics needs to be about. This is about leadership, and this is about our future. So stop with the extremist nonsense, please. And I'll call myself a leader and call myself someone who's going to get things done.
Thank you. And now you have 30 seconds, Congressman.
Well, I certainly respect your service, Colonel, and that's a given. But when you say, and you've said it many times, that you would take apart Medicare, when you say you would privatize Social Security, when you would say that you would not allow a woman to make her own healthcare decisions, I don't think those are mainstream decisions or policies. Those are on the far extreme, and that's what I'm talking about. Not about you as a person, because I believe you were very courageous and served our country, but your policies are extreme. That's what I'm talking about. And I believe in the free market too. That's why my wife and I started this
Thank you, Congressman.
And it was a very successful one. We know how it works.
Thank you, Congressman. Ms. Kinsella, you get the next question. There is, of course, a major debate over the implementation and the cost of the Affordable Health Care Act. What is your opinion of this act, and what actions will you take regarding the law if you are elected?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I do need to respond to, again, the false, lying, misleading, and distortions that just came out of Congressman Barber's mouth. I have not said that I want to privatize Social Security. You put that in an ad, and it was a lie. And Channel 4 in Tucson wouldn't even air it because they know they'd be held legally liable. It's just not true. I have not said I want to dismantle Medicare. I'm trying to save it. There's only one person on this stage tonight who has voted to rob $716 billion out of Medicare for our current seniors, and that's Congressman Barber. I'm trying to figure out thoughtful solutions in order to save Social Security and Medicare, not for his generation, but for my generation and the one that comes after it. If we do nothing, Social Security will not be solvent in 2033, the year that I turn Ron Barber's age. If we do nothing, Medicare will not be solvent in 2024, and other estimates say it'll be earlier. So we need to figure out how to make these programs workable, protect them for our current seniors, and figure out how to make them work for the next generations. Scare tactics to senior voters is absolutely unconscionable, and that's exactly what Mr. Barber's doing. I do not agree with the Affordable Care Act. It is the biggest government tax on the American people since the history of our country. I do not agree that we should be taxing small businesses. I do not agree that we should be putting mandates and having decisions coming out of the Secretary of Health and Human Services instead of decisions being made between individuals, their doctors, and their families. Look, our healthcare system is dysfunctional and things need to change, but we got to bring the cost down and make it affordable and available for everybody without a government-run program that cost over $2 trillion. All the bad stuff hasn't happened yet, you guys, so they're coming in 2014. I am committed to solving our healthcare crisis by working together to figure out how to bring that cost down. But no, I do not agree that it's a government-run program, and I agree we need to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you. You have 2 minutes to respond, Congressman.
Is it 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay. Well, the Affordable Care Act has been attempted to repeal it 33 times. I voted against it the last time it came, the first time it came up in my term in Congress. You know, it's time to move on. It's time to implement those things in the Affordable Care Act that make sense to the American people. Extending, for example, the age to 26 so that a young person can stay on their parents' insurance. I wish that had been in place when our daughter was going to nursing school. We had to dig into our savings to make sure she had a health plan. It also means that we are going to remove the annual and lifetime cap on services, which I know is important to everyone in this audience. You may have been here the night when the gentleman stood up and said, I'm a middle-class American. I'm a retired firefighter. My wife's a nurse. And when my wife got a neurological disease and she maxed out her insurance, they stopped her treatment. And had it not been for his church, treatment would never have started again. Had it not been for the goodness of this community, he would still be trying to get out of medical bankruptcy. That's not going to happen anymore because of what happened. The bill is far from perfect. We need to make changes. And I've already asked my legislative staff to put together a list of those changes that we need to make. Every bill of this size needs to have modifications because there always are unintended consequences. One of the things I want to make sure, and I've been talking to business people all over this district, is that the Affordable Care Act does not hurt small businesses, but helps them as it should. That's one of the most important things we can do. So when my opponent says that she would not destroy Medicare, but I did, let me talk about this ruse, the $716 billion ruse. That's a reduction in the cost of not of benefits, but of overpayments to providers. Her plan, the one that is in the Paul Ryan budget, would turn Medicare into a voucher system and take the same $716 billion and not put a dime of it back into Medicare.
Thank
That's
you,
a
Congressman.
problem.
Sorry, Ms. Kinsella, you have 30 seconds.
Congressman Barber, there is no such thing as an overpayment to providers for Medicare. Everybody who's a doctor or in the medical business knows they are underpaid for their services. This $716 billion is being robbed out of current Medicare recipients in order to pay for the government takeover of healthcare. I am totally against it. You voted for it. It impacts our current seniors. Doctors are and hospitals and nursing homes are going to stop taking Medicare. Medicare Advantage companies are going to shut down. I've talked to some of them when these rates get reduced. To call this an overpayment is just laughable. The doctors have to shift payments
I'm sorry, Ms. McSally, that is your 30
to
seconds.
private insurance in order to cover for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Congressman Barber, you get the next question. The government's proposed 2013 budget would see major changes to the TRICARE health system, resulting in an increase in fees, co-pays, and deductibles, which will negatively impact thousands of military retirees and their families, as well as National Guard and Reserve. Do you agree with these changes to the TRICARE system?
Absolutely not. When I went to Congress, there was a bill on the floor which I was proud to vote for, the Department of Defense budget, which took away all of those increases for our veterans and for our military personnel. And I would vote for it every time it came up. The men and women of our military have served us courageously. They don't need to have increases to a commitment that we made a long time ago. Our veterans are in the same position. So I've already had a chance to vote on this, and I voted no. And I will vote no every time it comes up. But let me just take a moment to go back to what my opponent said about Medicare and the $716 billion. I have met with the Arizona Hospital Association and the Arizona Medical Association, and I've talked to them about what they think of that $716 billion in reduced payments. They support it. They support it, and they supported it when it was put into a bill. And the reason they did was because overall, they will have many more people who are uninsured today being covered under the plan that's going forward. And let me just say something about Medicare Advantage. There are overpayments in Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage providers have been paid between 125 and 135% more than traditional Medicare without significant differences in what they deliver. Let's see what's happened now since their premiums have been reduced, their payments have been reduced. They've actually increased the number of people enrolled in Medicare Advantage. So don't say here that those industries are against it. They're in favor of this plan because they know it's a good plan.
You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. The president's proposal to cut benefits and to raise costs to our military retirees is just unconscionable. I totally am against it. I mean, we have a covenant between our country and those who choose to serve in uniform. I, for one, raised my right hand and served for 26 years. When you sign up to serve, you are putting your life on your line. You are putting your lifestyle on the line. The sacrifices that our troops make are ones that those who have never served in uniform could possibly understand. And they sign up and they know that when they retire, they're going to have those benefits and their health is going to be taken care of for the rest of their lives. So after the fact, to then be raising those fees because we can't figure out how to save money elsewhere is just dereliction of duty coming out of the administration. I am totally against it. The Senate and House bills that both were passed. The Senate was the worst version of them. The House was better, but this House still has increases in co-pays for pharmacies, or for pharmaceuticals and medications that people need. So it still has costs going up, and it's not what veterans are looking for, and it's not what they deserve based on the covenant we have of service. There are other ways for us to save money, not on the backs of those who put their lives on the line to protect our freedoms. And Ron, let's go back to the $716 billion. Again, there's not one doctor who says that they're being overpaid for Medicare. I mean, this is just ridiculous. And the way these guys are justifying is that, well, with the individual mandate, everybody's going to be in the game so they have more revenue coming in. Are you aware we have a shortage of doctors in the country right now? So doctors are going to stop taking Medicare patients. And then we have this 15-person unelected board of bureaucrats that have not been appointed yet. None of them have to be physicians. They're the ones that are going to decide how we're going to continue to get cost savings in Medicare. This is a little bit of what we call rationing, and this is not the way to deal with our seniors and to make sure they have the care that they need. I am for bringing the cost of Medicare down and medical costs down so it's affordable and available for everybody, not robbing Medicare.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Mr. Barber.
Well, it sounds like we agree that the those increases in TRICARE should not be implemented, and I certainly have supported that. And the bill I voted for was a bill that was presented by the majority. I was happy to join with my Republican colleagues to make sure that we did something that took away that action by the administration. I've disagreed with the administration on many things, and this was one of them. We cannot have those costs going up. So, you know, the issues really are, what are we going to do together to both solve the deficit as well as deal with problems like this? I've already been there. I've worked with the people across the line, across the aisle, and I'm going to continue to do so.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, the next question, Ms. McSally. Are there federal agencies or departments that you believe could be reduced in size, scope of responsibility, and authority? Which agencies would you reduce, or what do you see happening to those displaced if those reductions would occur?
Thanks. We've got a fiscal crisis on our hand, and we're spending 24% of our GDP on the federal government. So we got to put our heads together, and we got to work in a very nonpartisan way in order to bring the cost of the federal government down. And quite frankly, we need to pull out all the charge, just like a family has to do. They got to put all the bills on the table, and they got to figure out what we're paying and what it's being spent on to make sure that we're paying for our priorities first, and we're gaining savings and we're gaining efficiencies in everywhere we can. When it comes to some of the departments that maybe need to be looked at for efficiencies, I would say one of them is the Department of Energy. I mean, the Department of Energy was set up in order to get us to energy independence. How are we doing so far? We're not really on the road to energy independence, and we don't even have a strategy to get there. And every option we have to actually drill or build a pipeline to give jobs and get North American energy independence from Canada keeps being, stalled and denied. So let's get ourselves on the road to energy independence with a real strategy, and let's make sure federal dollars that are coming out of your taxpayers' dollars are not going to an agency that actually isn't getting us on the road to energy independence. I also think the EPA is overreaching. Hey, I'm an outdoorsman. I believe in clean air and clean water, and we got to make sure we're good stewards of the environment we've been given. But these guys are out of control. I mean, one example is their new ruling that's going to be impacting the Apache generating station here. We all know that this thing is not a health issue. It's not a visibility issue. I mean, it is just particles you can't even see. I came out very strongly against that. It's going to put people out of work, and it's going to raise our electricity prices. This is not the direction that we need to be going in right now. Unfortunately, Mr. Barber voted against the Stop the War on Coal Act, which would allow the EPA to continue to overreach and continue to be impacting jobs and impacting our economic future and our energy security that we need for our future. This is not the way to go. When it comes to saving money, let's look at every single department and figure out how we can save our dollars to get us on track to solve this deficit problem.
Thank you, Ms. McSally. Mr. Barber, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think every department has to be looked at, and with a scalpel. It's not a meat axe like the sequestration authority or authorization would do. 10% across the board, that's no way to make a budget cut. There are agencies that have duplication of services. For example, there are 47 different training programs across the federal government. 45 of them are duplicative. There's a need to condense that and to make sure that we're not doing things over and over again with different agencies. That doesn't make sense. As I mentioned earlier, last year, the GAO, the Governmental Accountability Office, said that $115 billion in overpayments were made across this country, many of them to Medicare providers. In Florida alone, 3 or 4 months ago, $500 million were found to be fraudulently billed, and 19 providers are being indicted. There's ways to go after this. Fraud is one of them, certainly. Reducing duplication. And what about not allowing organizations like the Government Service, GSA, to take a almost $1 million convention in Las Vegas with all kinds of strange things that they purchased? We can't allow that. It has to be stopped. And as far as the federal agencies are concerned, I have fought FEMA when it tried to put Marana in a floodplain, and we were successful. I have fought the EPA when it tried to prevent wastewater going from the Huachuca City to the fort, and we were successful. And I fought the Forest Service when it tried to say that people in the public could not have a say in the Rosemont mine discussion. I'm willing to fight any federal agency and look to reduce their services when it's appropriate. That's the course forward, and I've already been doing that since I've been in Congress.
Thank you, Congressman. Ms. McSally, you have 30 seconds.
What we need is leadership. Congressman Barber has been in Congress for 4 months, and this is his audition for whether he should be there for another 24 months. He hasn't led on anything, and nobody really expected that to happen anyway. But we needed someone who's actually going to lead, who is actually going to define where the aisle is instead of just talking about the 1 or 2 times they cross the aisle. We need to figure out how we're going to solve these problems to get our federal government out of the way for businesses, to get our economy growing again, and get our fiscal house in order. This takes leadership, and this takes guts, and that's what I'm going to bring to represent you.
Thank you, Ms. McSally. Even though we didn't know what your answer was going to be on that previous one, Ms. McSally, this one dovetails into it a little bit, and it goes to the congressman first. What is your opinion of the EPA's, Environmental Protection Agency's, proposal to require coal-fired electricity plants in Arizona to install equipment to reduce or eliminate regional haze?
Well, I'm very concerned about the EPA trying to impose a multi-million-dollar solution to a problem that may not exist. I signed a letter to the EPA along with Congressman Jeff Flake demanding that they have public hearings where these plants exist. And so we had one. Otherwise, the EPA would have just gone about its business and made a decision. We had one in Benson that affects the Wilcox plant. And 300 or more people came out, and only 2 or 3 people spoke in favor of the EPA proposal. So I've been active in trying to make sure that the EPA does not overreach, as I've done in many other situations with federal bureaucracies. As I mentioned earlier, when they tried to stop the wastewater going from Pachuca City to the fort, that is now underway. So the EPA, as all federal agencies, can and sometimes do overreach. It's the job of a member of Congress to push back and make sure that they don't get away with it. So as far as the plant here is concerned, many jobs are at stake. And I've asked the EPA and I've asked the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to give me a side-by-side comparison of what will happen if we use a cheaper technology to deal with that plant or a more expensive one. The answer is that the cheaper one may well work. That's what I think we have to do, is to look for reasonable solutions. And if we have to do a more expensive one, to have it amortized over a longer period of time so people and plants are not put at risk. This plant cannot go out of existence. The jobs are essential, and I'm going to fight to make sure it stays in place.
Congressman. Ms. McSally, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks. I already gave you how I felt about this issue, and I actually sent a representative, and we had a statement at that hearing in Benson. Mr. Barber didn't even send a representative to give a statement on that matter, so we weren't sure what his position was. But we do know when the Stop the War on Coal Act came up, he voted against it. The whole intent of this act was to preserve jobs at plants like this in our district. Preserve jobs at plants like at the Navajo Generating Station, which, by the way, has all the electricity for all the cap water in Arizona. So if the EPA continues to overreach and overstretch like this, then we are going to have a problem with not just our energy security, but also jobs for Americans in a time when we are in a fiscal crisis. Mr. Barber says he's against it, but then he goes to DC and he votes against a bill called Stop the War on Coal Act. This is what politicians do. He's voted 89% of the time with Nancy Pelosi and Rahul Grijalva to include one that was going to help streamline energy, us getting to energy independence, one that was going to minimize and simplify our tax code, one that's going to simplify to get to rare earth minerals and mining from 10 years down to 30 months. He voted against a plan to avoid sequestration. I'm not making this stuff up, you guys. This is a vote on his record, and I wish we could talk a little bit more about his record while he's here and what he's voting on, not just letters he's sending to somebody. Those letters don't get anything done. I'm ready to go to DC and actually get something done.
Thank you, Ms. McSally. You have 30 seconds, Congressman.
Well, obviously, Colonel McSally, you don't know that letters do work, especially when it comes from bipartisan members of the delegation. That letter got the EPA to back off and give people time to have their say. And that's what I did, and I will do it again. Now, let's talk about these votes that you're talking about. You have misrepresented many of those votes. 89% with Nancy Pelosi. How about all of the votes included in that 89% that are bipartisan bills, that are unanimously supported? You don't even talk about that. You try to misrepresent. I have crossed the aisle for 23 important votes, and that's what I will do again if need be.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're down to almost toward the end, if you can believe it. How about that?
Too much fun.
Next
Can we go
question
another
goes-
hour?
Pardon me?
I'm just getting warmed up.
Yes. Number 10 question goes to you first, Ms. McSally. And it's a little long one, so I'll try to.
Okay.
Water resources are an ongoing area of concern and debate, particularly in our area. The Endangered Species Act is used by environmental groups to target Fort Huachuca, threatening its missions and the local economy. And recently, the Bureau of Land Management is claiming it has senior water rights over others in the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which would impact potential development. So, what do you think can be done to help preserve the San Pedro River while at the same time ensuring the sustainability of Fort Huachuca and common sense economic growth in the future?
Well, thank you. That's a great way to end it. Common sense economic growth. Look, we need Fort Huachuca to stay here, and Fort Huachuca is Sierra Vista and vice versa. And the Endangered Species Act, although well-intended, has gotten totally out of control. That combined with another act called the Equal Access to Justice Act, which sounds good on its surface, but what it does is it allows the environmental groups to actually use your hard-earned taxpayer dollars to continue to sue the government, to make them have to defend in court why Fort Huachuca needs to stay open, and they use your money to actually win and continue to defend things like the Huachuca Water Umbel, which are much more important than our national security needs in making sure that we have Fort Huachuca here training the world's greatest in all the areas of intelligence and communications and electronic attack and in unmanned aerial vehicles to provide for our national security. So I strongly will fight to defend Fort Huachuca in Sierra Vista for common sense economic development. We need changes to the Endangered Species Act, and we need common sense changes to the Equal Access to Justice Act. So it cannot be abused in this way, and we're not using your hard-earned money only to just continue to fight against these extreme environmentalist groups. I'm committed to fight to keep these assets here and to have real common sense economic development and not let these guys be driving our agenda.
Thank you, Ms. McSally. Congressman, you have 2 minutes.
Well, Fort Huachuca, as we all know, is an incredibly important national security asset. I've been out to the fort many times. I've seen what we do there. The men and women who work there are protecting our country in ways that no other installation in this country is doing. The human intelligence work, the work to intercept attempts to hack into our computer systems. It's an amazing facility. As all of you know, many of you I'm sure have worked there or know it. We have to preserve and protect Fort Huachuca into the long term. And one of the jobs that I have as a member of Congress is not only to protect it, and as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, to draw attention to its importance, but also to make sure that we expand the mission of Fort Huachuca as much as possible. That's why I brought the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee here a couple of weeks ago to see firsthand the importance of Fort Huachuca to our national security. And as we know, the importance of it to the economic well-being of this county. As far as water conservation is concerned, the fort has done an incredible job. Reduced its water consumption by 50%. The city of Sierra Vista and the county, Cochise County, have implemented water conservation efforts that have done a great job. We need to do more, but they've done a great job so far. I worked with Huachuca City and the Upper San Pedro Partnership to prevent the EPA from letting wastewater go from Huachuca City, which would benefit that community, to the fort to recharge into the aquifer, which helps support the Upper San Pedro. This is an issue I've been working on for the last 6 years. I've met many times with the Upper San Pedro Partnership. I participated with Congressman Giffords in getting money for the Upper San Pedro Partnership to do its job. So I know this issue very well from having worked it for a long time. And you can be assured that I will work in Congress to make sure that the fort is preserved and protected, as well as the Upper San Pedro. They are inextricably tied together. One cannot exist without the other. You know that, I know that, and we're not going to let anyone get in the way of making sure that that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Sally, you got 30 seconds.
As most of you know, I retired as a colonel, and I was a squadron commander of an A-10 squadron out of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. I know firsthand the national treasure that we have here in Fort Huachuca. I wouldn't have been able to have my squadron trained and ready to deploy to combat anywhere in the world on 24 hours notice without the capabilities that are here. I understand and I can speak to the national security interest and the national security capabilities that come out of this national treasure here because I've been there, I've been overseas, I've been fighting for our interests and our values overseas against extremists, and I know what this value brings. I don't need anybody writing a point paper about it. I can poke my finger in the chest of those on the Armed Services Committee myself.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that actually concludes the 10 questions that the Chamber Legislative Affairs Committee came up with. And to refresh your memory, I read this off at the beginning, but each candidate now will have the opportunity to pose one question to their opponent. And the responding